to the idea that there is no such thing as a random act of violence. And after we hear and see these mass shootings, we often hear that term that this was just an unfortunate random act of violence. And that's really poor framing of the actual problem, because what that does is that kind of compounds this idea within the public that we are sort of in the worst case scenario lottery bingo game, whatever, that we are just sort of waiting for our number to be called. And that because of that, it makes sense why you would move more to sort of a protection and preparedness mentality.
Hello and welcome to everyone out there. This is Michael Yearby and this is Unfiltered Conversations. And today we have a special guest, Robert from TVTP Solutions. He spent over 15 years in targeting violence prevention, and his work is all about making prevention practical so communities can realize what's understanding and interpret the pathways before it turns really tragic. So Robert's going to really explain that to us. So Robert, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure on being here.
So just doing a little research on you, and I thought it was quite interesting that one, you try to do prevention work for communities. What's that all about?
So the main focus on prevention is focused around the idea that most municipalities look at security from more of a protection and preparedness / response frame set, and that many of the methodologies and philosophies around trying to prevent targeted violence or mass shootings and things like that really focus in on what I would classify more as protection measures. So your things like fences, doors, bulletproof glass, cameras, more security. While there is a prevention element to that, it's not really upstream prevention. It's more of a defensive posture of kind of putting these measures in place, hoping that they will stop or prevent something from actually getting into the building or something like that, or killing people and harming people. But it's not necessarily preventing the act from actually happening. It's trying to protect the people in case of an act is happening. And so most of my work is focused on really broadening the definition of what prevention is, and to provide some context to the idea that there is no such thing as a random act of violence. And after we hear and see these mass shootings, we often hear that term that this was just an unfortunate random act of violence. And that's really poor framing of the actual problem, because what that does is that kind of compounds this idea within the public that we are sort of in the worst case scenario lottery bingo game, whatever, that we are just sort of waiting for our number to be called. And that because of that, it makes sense why you would move more to sort of a protection and preparedness mentality, right? That you believe that if it's random, you don't know who these people are, you don't know where the attack's going to come from or when the attack's going to come from, and therefore it makes quite a lot of sense that you would put all these barriers and preparedness to respond measures. The actual reality of it is that narrative of it's a random act of violence doesn't match with the actual character narrative of the individual that carries out the attack. And we actually hear and see that narrative of individuals who were displaying concerning behavior throughout their community, maybe at their school, maybe at their place of business. Some of them have had run-ins or multiple run-ins with mental health and public health entities, law enforcement, etc. So that really bursts the bubble of the framing of random act of violence. You don't get on those people's radar if you're sort of flying under the radar, if you're unknown. And so really expanding the municipalities and those different entities into more of a prevention mindset. And what does that look like? And how do we develop more prevention-based methodologies to, when we hear of concerning behavior, getting and acting upon that proactively, rather than creating sort of a latent error type environment where you're waiting for sort of a threshold to be crossed in order for response to take place.
So I think my question is to you, like what in your experience, what is the most common reason people like hesitate to respond quickly to those situations or report situations where they see something that doesn't look quite right, but they're kind of like, "Oh, I'm scared to report this situation because I don't want to look biased. I don't want to look
Right.
this, that, and the third, right?
Right. So
What,
there's kind of two to three stumbling blocks that you sort of see. The first is that we've been kind of indoctrinated into this culture of see something, say something. Okay. And the idea, it's a fantastic campaign because it kind of says a lot without saying much at all. Like, see something, see what? I don't know, but we kind of all know what we're looking for. Say something, say what and to whom, it doesn't say, but we all kind of know what to do. So in terms of a marketing campaign, it's fantastic. The problem with that is that we don't really have a reporting problem. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, a lot of these attackers are on people's radar for sometimes years, sometimes decades. So we don't have a reporting problem. We have a coordination problem. Okay. And so that is one of the hiccups, is that people believe we're operating in this idea that there's somehow, if we just have more reporting, we'll be able to handle this. And the reality is that the systems that are in place are designed to be sort of very, very specific in their optimization of what they are looking for. And that doesn't lend themselves many times to really coordinating and sharing information and things like that. The second real stumbling block is just a human psychological stumbling block. Much like the framing of random act of violence, we are, as human beings, really, really bad at evaluating value. Okay. The reason why The Price is Right has been on for so many decades is because we're just terrible at assigning value. There's a never ending supply of storylines that you can do with, like, The Price is Right. And so there is a visualization aspect to these protection and response measures where you're seeing guards, or you're seeing more cameras, or you're seeing fences being put up. And there is a over exaggeration of value that we are placing on it. And one of the things that I have heard throughout my career has been sort of, well, if you want to pay minimum wage to your security guard, you're going to get minimum wage security, right? And there is something there where if we go out and spend a couple $100,000 or $1 million on boosting up our police SWAT teams and putting more cameras and motion detectors and things like that into the environment, and we're going to get a return on investment of that much. And so our metrics are skewed because we can't really tell value very well. And the idea that we would assign a metric for ROI on those things of, like, well, nothing happened today, therefore it's working, doesn't match. The other thing is, the other trip up that I mentioned is that we just have designed these systems for we've overspecified a lot of these systems and programs that are designed to help individuals. And I have personally worked with states that have analytics on things like, they know if you're a first-time recipient of food stamps, they almost know from the month, week, and day that you're going to come back for housing assistance, right? But the food stamp people are solely for food stamps, and the housing people are solely for housing. And you sort of have this specification of crises, and systems generally become rigid. And you'll see every once in a while networks within these systems, but they're usually single points of failure where they're, one or two people within the systems that sort of want to coordinate across these sort of lines, but then one gets promoted or one leaves or one retires, and then the whole kind of network just kind of
Yeah,
crumbles
cascade.
and goes up in flames. And so part of that specificity and that rigidity makes it very, very difficult to really come up with a concept of care. We have a system of
Mm,
care, but we place the responsibility on the person in crisis to navigate through their crises, right? So in that instance where I said, I have states that know if you're a first time recipient, you're going to come at probably around X date for housing assistance. Well, that individual who's getting the food stamps doesn't know that in 2 months, 1 week, and 3 days, they're going to be having a housing crisis. They're just trying to get food on the table for that day. And so that's what I mean when I say like we have a system of care, not a concept of care.
mm,
And the sort of last little wrinkle within why we don't do the prevention thing is that a lot of, especially when you're talking about violence and you're looking at individuals who have committed these acts of violence in their sort of character arc that they take, that character arc is riddled with almost like 1,000 paper cuts, right? Of
mm,
instances that have nothing to do with violence and threatening behavior. So things like, the death of a grandfather or the breakup of a girlfriend, boyfriend, the uh, losing your job or being kicked out of your house, or even something as innocuous as just deciding to quit the soccer team or basketball team or whatever, just on a whim kind of thing. We don't put the dots together until the back end. Right.
yeah.
And so because we see these things sort of in a vacuum, these are just sort of one-off instances. We don't have that sort of proactive approach to take care of that person's issues in real time. We sort of
Mm,
wait for, as I mentioned, that threshold to kind of be crossed over, or the
mhm.
qualifications to receive those benefits to be brought up, to then respond. And so it's just sort of a mind shift change on how we have sort of designed the way we look at how we give care to our community and the programs that we give responsibility to do this, and how we have designed them for more reporting aspects rather than coordinating aspects.
Wow, see that's truly amazing. One thing in the military that we deal with consistently and we talk about is a knee-jerk reaction. We usually have a situation that happens and a lot of units, and especially in leadership, they want to have a knee-jerk reaction where they want to seem like they're doing something. And they usually overcompensate for a situation. And usually that happens, or they don't do anything at all because they feel that they're powerless or they don't know exactly what that looks like. And it seems like when you're talking about prevention, these innocuous things in which we see, right, that happen, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're saying that these things are not random, but if we take care of those small paper cuts, those small things, we actually help with that prevention measure and actually steer the course in the right way. Um, one question I did.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. And I think what ends up happening when you don't respond proactively to those little things end up becoming the foundation for bigger things to sort of build on top. And that's
Yeah,
where it becomes harder and harder and harder for our sort of interruption or intervention methods to kind of break through.
yeah,
And people will, sort of understanding how people kind of become radicalized within sort of a violent ideation mindset is very similar to understanding how people fall into substance abuse or suicidal ideation. We have a lot of empathy for people that sort of fall down those trapdoors. As soon as there's somebody who, quote unquote, is putting on the tinfoil hat or is rambling around about things that are sort of more taboo and the like, we do not interpret those as calls for help in the same way that we do for those other crises, right? And
mm,
we often decide that it's better for us to push those people off to the sidelines, right? And then
yeah.
go and engage with those people. There is a line of thought that believes that sort of individuals that kind of take that more violent ideation approach, that there is a subconscious call for help, that these
Mm,
extreme behaviors and these wild behaviors that happen are really your subconscious kind of trying its hardest to shout out that you need help, and that it's just being misinterpreted, and that the escalation that goes as you go down further down the path of violence becomes more erratic. And the it is just sort of, again, you're just dealing with a lot of natural human sort of instincts, both on the person who's sort of in crisis and then just on general society of how we view and how we react to different things. And so I think your point too of sort of doing an overreaction is often, again, goes back to sort of the way in which we frame sort of the problem, right? And I've had a personal experience with this, especially within security. Of I went into a liquor store one time, and I could see the bars on the window and the doors reinforced, and I go through the door with big giant fluorescent lights all around the store. I have to go through a metal detector, then I get wanded down by an armed security guard. And then finally, I'm allowed to go into the liquor store, and it's like floor to ceiling, bulletproof glass, and there's CCTV cameras everywhere. And I have to do all my commerce through a drawer, basically. And
mhm.
logically, I'm in the safest place that I have ever been in my entire life. But the narrative in my brain is I've never been more scared in my entire
Yeah.
life, right? Because the narrative doesn't become, look at all these things that we've put into place, we're secure. The narrative is, what the hell goes on here that they felt it necessary to implement all of these security apparatuses? Get me out of here, because it obviously means that bad stuff happens, right? And so you see this sometimes post attack. In fact, in Rhode Island, where I'm from, we had an attack at Brown University, and there has been talk of hardening different campus buildings and redoing their card security measures and putting more cameras around everywhere, doing more outward displays of security. That is something that really kind of brings the noise level, I would say, for lack of a better term, up in an environment, right?
Mm,
And when you are in security, just naturally, from an anthropological, we'll go even that deep into it. Our eyes, ears, all of our senses for our own survival is attuned to the abnormal, right? So we
yeah.
don't have the bandwidth to process absolutely everything that comes at us. So what our brain does is it prioritizes what is abnormal. And then we will assess if that abnormality is something that we have to sort of worry about. When you put all of that okay, sort of into a space from a security standpoint, what you are looking at doing is trying to make the water, for if we go zen about it, you're trying to make the water as still as possible.
Yeah.
And this way you'll be able to see what's causing the ripple. Okay. And when you put all this stuff into the space, it just creates noise and ripples. And so oftentimes, or actually almost all times, we will default into reacting what's right in front of our face.
Yeah.
And we will miss those subtle signs. And this is where the prevention stuff comes in. And like I said, a lot of these things in the character arc of these individuals are often not related to violence, are innocuous one-off events. But because they are not screaming in our face threat or violence or something like that, they get deprioritized, right? And you
100.
will see this with mental health agencies, where you might call because you're concerned about somebody, and the first question will be, well, are they a threat to themselves or others? And the response is usually, well, no,
Yeah.
not yet, right? Like, I
Yeah.
don't think so. And they'll go like, all right, well, then get to the back of the line, because I've got X amount of clinicians and I've got a stack about this big of people who actually are, right? Law enforcement. You'll call law enforcement. Hey, I'm concerned about this individual. Well, are they doing anything illegal? Well, No, I guess not technically. Well, then, all right, we'll put them on a list, or we'll watch them, or we'll go and we'll try to scare them a little bit that they're scaring other people. Why don't they tone it down a bit? But there's really nothing that they can do.
Mm,
And so it is a much more holistic way of looking at how we approach security, how we approach these sort of mental health and just general community health of how we want to interact with the people in our communities
mm,
and how we would like our communities to be more proactive with all of us, including those who are struggling in some sort of way, irregardless of what that struggle is.
mm. That's pretty amazing. It reminds me of a book that I read. I forgot the name of the book or the author, where he was talking about Western and Eastern culture. And he was stating that in Western culture, just like you were saying, that we tend to, our brains are formatted not to see the entire picture, but to see the tiger in front of us, right? A threat. But like in Eastern cultures, their mind is racing to understand the environment in which they're in. It's not that they don't see the tiger, it's that they're looking at the whole holistic environment around them so that they can process all the information accordingly and take the right measures and steps.
Well,
And so,
I used a phrase called Layton's error. I'm
yeah,
not sure if you
yeah,
are familiar with it. I don't know if your audience is, but for those who aren't familiar with Layton's error, basically you have active error, which would be sort of me stubbing my toe or something like that on my desk. Layton's error would look at the environment. Have I placed my desk in a place that almost invites me doing that active error? And I think your point is absolutely correct in that we have sort of, I mentioned, we sort of have designed these systems and these programs in a way that really creates sometimes the problems that we are trying to protect against or trying to be proactive and stop. But we actually are inviting more issues by the way they are designed.
and that's pretty, to me, I think that's pretty amazing that like as you understand that, and when you talk about prevention, I want to get your take on things like when you see Dave Chappelle, for instance. He got attacked on stage, right, by a young man, the political setting about what he thought Dave Chappelle represented. And then Dave Chappelle also, he even joked about it in his comedy, where he talks about mass shootings and different things of that nature, and how that different schools do mass shooting training and stuff like that, and they're teaching the shooter where everybody's going to go. And he made slight comedies about it. What is your thoughts about that? Where I know you probably work with communities, schools, and different organizations, and you did mention Brown, where they actually kind of do all this type of training for mass shootings. Do you think that actually helps, or do you think that's like, I would say, a false positive?
So there is value in that stuff, right? There is value. You don't want to be just wide open, okay? You
Mhm,
don't want to be caught flat-footed and completely unprepared for something. So in the sense of providing, the active shooter drills and things like that, or putting up protection measures that are prevention isn't trying to supplant those things.
mhm,
What my argument is more about is the overvaluation that we have placed on that stuff. And so I think it's fantastic, much like we do for fire drills, right? We are calm in that situation when we hear the fire drill because we kind of move in unison because we've been sort of hardwired into through our trainings of where to go, what to do. And that keeps us calm in that situation. And that's good. And you want that. So from a prevention standpoint with sort of the school shootings, what I see is a real misunderstanding or just a counter narrative as to the motivations of these individuals and how these individuals get from A to attack, right? And from one point to the other. For the most part, what you will see is people kind of try to focus in on the what rather than the
mhm,
why. So there is a lot of emphasis on what that individual is sort of talking about or attaching themselves to. And there's a misunderstanding of why they are attaching themselves to that. Okay. So
Uh-huh.
in whether it is religious or political or a combination of both, or a certain grievance against a certain race or group of people or whatever it is, what the individual that is sort of heading down this pathway of violence and sort of begins with a radicalization pathway as well. What you find is that the human brain has to know what it is. Okay, it is
Mhm.
unacceptable for our brains to not know who we are, what we're attached to, what we believe, what our purpose is. And so in lack, if that is nebulous and not very defined, we will go and search for something that provides things with to fill those buckets, right? And that can come from a lot of different places. So I may take a little bit from here, I may take a little bit from here, right? And I might build sort of like this reality prism slash quilt, right? That then everything gets filtered through. Every new event that comes through gets filtered into that, and that helps me identify with who I am and what
Mhm.
my purpose is and who my community is and everything else. And that's really the three pillars: is identity, community, and purpose. That's what it for everybody. This isn't just for people who are struggling or anything else. And that doesn't just go for teenagers. That goes for who are, growing up trying to figure out who they are. This goes for, people who are going through a career shift, who might be retired and have been doing something for 35 years and now they have to figure out what they are. It's, people in the military, as their life is very, very regimented. All of a sudden they leave the military and it's a huge shock to the system. Okay, like now what do I do? What is my purpose? What am I? And so it affects all of us. And those
Mhm.
intangibles is really what becomes the solidifying thing for individuals, and because we have to be something. Now in the United States, we've sort of, at least politically, we've kind of bifurcated our political system where it actually, I think, to a degree, it exacerbates that sort of radicalization where you don't really have a lot of choices available
Yeah.
to you, and so you have to kind of attach yourself to one team or the other.
Yeah.
And when things happen, you have to kind of figure out a way to protect your team, right? And I think that's sort of because the idea that you would go off cold turkey is too great. And this is where we sort of separate between sort of substance abuse, and sort of a chemical dependency intervention mindset that we can. Intervention to me has a over the top power dynamic, right?
Mhm.
Where you are coming into a situation with a person and you are basically saying, what you are doing is wrong. It's going to hurt you. It's going to hurt others. We're going to stop it right here. Right. That works when you have somebody who has chemical dependency and physically cannot really make decisions for themselves, right? Because of their addiction. And you need somebody in that power position, sort of making decisions for them. When you go to radicalization, especially when it comes to this type of radicalization and down the pathway of violence, if you come over the top like that, what you do is you are assaulting their identity, community, and purpose. And you are making a
Mhm.
personal attack. Okay. And when people feel personally attacked, what they will do is they will double down.
Yep.
Okay. You will
Defensive posture
actually,
all day. Yep.
you will dig in their heels, they will double down, and then they will extract themselves out of society even more.
Yeah.
So one of the
100%.
biggest signs that we see of people, irregardless of the motivation of past attackers, is a removal from society. They isolate
Yeah.
themselves
Uh-huh.
because they do not feel that they are somehow apart, or the people that are around them are coming with that sort of intervention sort of mentality. When you have a psychological and an emotional sort of addiction, right? You have to treat this like a hostage negotiation rather than an intervention. And so people are only as faithful as their options dictate. And so
Right.
instead of coming over the top and saying, I am here to lead you and you will follow me or you're going to get in trouble, is not an option. All right. It does not fill the buckets of identity, community, and purpose. And so what you have to do, much like you would with a hostage negotiation at a bank robbery or something like that, you work and negotiate different options that those individuals have in front of them. Why don't we start with just releasing one of the hostages, right?
Mm,
While we're working on getting you that helicopter and while we're working on doing all that, why don't you just release one? Well, let's just start with one, right? Just so that we're all on the same page, right? And you're like, okay, right? And then that kind of materializes. This is what you have to do with these individuals, is that you have to present options where they see there is an off-ramp where they're going to be able to fill that identity, community, and purpose bucket in a
mm,
more fulfilling way than what they are doing. And we have seen manifestos from past attackers and everything else that are basically saying, I know this is wrong. I'm sorry I'm doing this. I'm sorry of the pain that this is going to cause to my family and all the other families, but this, like, it has to be done. I don't want to do this. And logically, you would be like, just jump off the train, like just
yeah,
jump off, right? Like,
yeah,
why are you on this? Because it's emotional and it's psychological. I can't, right? I cannot psychologically and emotionally jump off of this and then go into the nebulous and not know what I am, not know who's, my community is, who cares about me, and I don't know what my purpose is in life. And so you just see people track farther and farther and farther, even though they may know that they are going in a dark place, but nobody is providing any new options for them to
mm.
get off that.
And that's kind of it's quite intriguing because you're describing human behavior. A lot of times, especially like I have a friend who has a podcast. He talks about different relationships, and he was saying that people cheat. For the reason why people cheat is because they haven't made up their mind that they have a viable option to let go, and move forward with. I guess it's the monkey with the tree branch. It's the monkey actually grabbing and holding on to the prior tree branch before he gets the actual footing and understanding that this tree branch is safe to support the weight before he
Right.
transitions the arm. And it's like, it's amazing that you're saying that because it makes so much sense, especially when it comes into the realm of safety and prevention. What if you can redesign an average school or municipality um, safety plan? What would you have them include when it comes to prevention? What are I would say the three, and you probably already said it, the concepts that you would have them add to their safety plan?
So one of the things that gets inserted with a lot of these plans is something called a behavioral threat assessment and
Mm,
management, otherwise known as a BTAM. Now there are all different types of BTAM models. So I'm not, some are better for schools, some are better for law enforcement focused and things like that, mental health. So I won't go into the, all of that because that's a huge rabbit hole. But behavioral threat assessment, what it does at its core is it strips away that consideration of the what and focuses in on the why and the behaviors that are being observed. When you
mm,
focus on the what that we see a lot of schools do, our own biases come into play. And
mm,
so you will try to put guardrails on certain content, or you will put certain punishments for certain things if things are said or done or things like that. And that is just again, these are educators. They're not security professionals. I give all the schools I work with a very, very long leash because I think that they have been put into a position where they are looked at as the nucleus of sort of behavioral threat assessment, that they are supposed to be the epicenter and coordinating outward towards police and mental health and different community groups and things like that. And you get these very skewed results, data results of threats within a community where upwards of 96 to 98% of all threats in the community are done by 18 and under. right? And it's like that. Well, if that's the case, then the children are no longer our future. They're the problem.
Yeah.
The schools have to be a component of a behavioral threat assessment sort of methodology rather than the nucleus. And we have seen some towns begin to sort of round that circle, and sort of elevate the behavioral threat assessment team to more of a town-based type thing where schools and mental health and community groups and law enforcement and even something like small business associations and FedEx and Amazon and the departments of rec and the departments of sanitation all kind of come together to confirm and to bring information into that. Right. And so one of the great successes that we have had with schools was bringing bus drivers into the behavioral threat assessment team. Now, we brought bus drivers into the threat assessment team specifically for the sole purpose because I had mentioned it for violence prevention, right? We wanted to have another node of information if people were acting up on the bus or at the bus stop and things like that. What ended up happening was we ended up getting reports of a kid who was being dropped off at one stop and then picked up at another, and
Mm.
finding out that there was, that the mother had lost one job and now was doing like three jobs and, needed care and stuff like that. Nothing to do with violence, right? But
Yeah.
they were able to proactively help that family get through that tough time.
So yeah.
They found a kid who was being dropped off in a car that looked like they were like living out of it with mattresses and pillows, and come to find out, yeah, they had been evicted from their apartment and they needed some housing assistance. Again, nothing to do with violence, but proactive and stuff like that. That is really at the core of what behavioral threat assessment is about. It's about
Mm.
identifying behaviors and those abnormalities, irregardless. The problem with behavioral threat assessment is the title itself, is that the general public thinks that they are looking for
A
threatening
threat.
behavior. Right. And so one of the things that we've had great success in doing has been instituting that mindset, that behavioral threat assessment and management mindset into the schools, but call it by a different name. And one of the best names that we've come up with is care
Mhm.
teams. Okay.
Like that.
You can imagine if you are a parent and you get a call and you say, "Hi, I'm Rob Mahoney. I'm from the behavioral threat assessment team." Your guard is going to go straight up. Right.
Yeah.
And if I go, "Hi, I'm Rob Mahoney. I'm from the school district's care team," it's a completely different
Big.
dynamic. And it also encompasses a much larger scope of what you are looking for. And so
Mhm.
you can have a care team within a classroom, you can have a care team within a school, you can have a care team within the district. It can go as small and as expansive as you want. You also don't have to have specialized training to be in a care team. It's kind of already ingrained in the title of what you're looking for. You're trying to have a caring atmosphere. You're a team of caring people. It doesn't matter what the issue is, we're going to address it. Where behavioral threat assessment sounds very technical, and oftentimes you will have people who are assigned to the behavioral threat assessment team, and they will get reports, and then there's like a let go of responsibility, right? Like, these are the technical expertise. We don't have to handle anything more. We've done our job. We've handed it off to the experts, and I'm just going to sit back and let them do their thing, right? And that is not the type of that's not proactive at all, right? And so those, if I were to, go back to your question of how you design that, that is sort of one of the biggest things that has to get integrated. And I really do mean integrated. And there's a
Yeah.
great sort of analogous sort of story that I use in my talks about Mercedes-Benz and Toyota. And sort of in the late 70s, early 80s, the two most reliable cars on the market was a Mercedes-Benz SL something or other and a Toyota Corolla. And it baffled the car industry for years and years of like, how on earth is this little Japanese company pumping out these cars that are rivaling Mercedes-Benz, which are 3 to 4 times as much. And Mercedes would always advertise, the apprenticeship that all the people on the manufacturing line would have. And how the guy who was in charge of installing the windows had been there for 15 plus years, and that there was a 1,500 point inspection before any car got onto the lot and everything else in Toyota. And so with that, they paid a giant premium. Mercedes paid a giant premium for all that stuff. And they found out that they did none of that.
Yep.
They moved people all over the assembly line. There was no point inspection at the end of it. There was nothing. And finally, what they realized was that Toyota didn't have to do quality control at the end because they integrated it within the manufacturing process.
Yep.
And they allowed their sort of unskilled workers to stop the manufacturing line at any point for any reason.
Yeah.
Where at Mercedes-Benz, if your job was simply to put the door on or put the window, in the door, and that was it. And if it didn't fit correctly, or you saw something wrong with a screw or something like that, that was not your place, right? And that was the responsibility of the guy at the end who had all the technical expertise and was going to do the 1,500 point inspection, right? Toyota said, we don't need to deal with all that. Hit the alarm, pull the lever, we'll go and we'll take a look at it, and we'll address it right then and there. And that creates a completely different dynamic, right? And now, to Mercedes' credit, look, it was still the most reliable car, one of the most reliable cars on the market, but they were paying an exorbitant amount of money to have their manufacturing designed in that way. Where I think everybody would agree, like, the better way to do it is to have it integrated into the process. So we're
100%.
talking about when we go for schools, we have to go from like pre-K, kindergarten, all the way through high school. And it's difficult to kind of get that across to sort of the powers that be, as well as the parents in that school district, that, yeah, we're going to put a behavioral threat assessment model in for even kindergartners and second graders and things like that. The reason why you do that, because practical wise, most of the behavioral threat assessment sort of methodology happens at around high school. Okay. And the problem with that is that you have a lead up of middle school, elementary school, of potential issues that could have been taken care of or have been sort of festering, right? And then all of a sudden you're going to sort of address them in high school.
High school, yeah.
It is a bit like threading a needle, right? You're kind of, again, you're putting a lot of emphasis on your response and your protection methodologies when you do that. Where if you had it integrated, it wouldn't matter what teacher came in and out of the district. It wouldn't matter what principal came in and out. It wouldn't even matter what district superintendent came in and out. This is just how the district does business, right? And this is just, we share information. We have a file all the way through the student's life. We are proactive in our community outreach to different departments of rec and boys and girls clubs and everything else. So we have touch points throughout the community of some skilled, some unskilled, some technical, some non-technical, but we have our pulse. We're able to take the temperature and pulse of everybody in the community, so that if there is sort of an abnormality, if something is triggering something that's a little bit different with people, that we're able to nip that in the butt early on, instead of sort of waiting and hoping that, we'll get to it, or we'll get there when the threshold is crossed over.
Pretty cool. That's pretty awesome. Well, Robert, thank you so much for being on the show. Is there anything that you want to pass to my listeners, your website, or anything that you want to, I guess, relay that you think will be vital for them to understand and know?
Yeah, so a few things. So one of the things, we didn't really get deep dived into the actual pathway, like the sections of the pathway of violence. So I'll go over those really, really quick. So it typically starts with a grievance, which sort of makes sense, but we all have grievances, so that shouldn't be your first sort of cue, the one thing that you'll look for from a behavioral standpoint are those grievances sort of solidifying themselves into an ideation. All right. And if we begin to sort of see, you begin to sort of evaluate that this person's identity, community, and purpose is kind of revolving around a handful of grievances or one grievance in particular and is starting to become an ideation, that is a telling sign. The other telling sign is there will be a lot of research that will be done. So they will be researching other community groups, they will be researching potential targets, they will be researching past attackers and sort of glorifying those or bringing that sort of into their orbit and using that as sort of justification for their ideation. There is then a prep where they may be prepping, they might be acquiring weapons, or if they have weapons, they might be using them to get more proficient in them. There might be prepping where they may look and research different sites that they are looking to target or individual groups. And then there is a breaching or a broadcasting sort of entity. Now, this isn't linear. Your listeners know this is not a exactly linear process. It sort of follows this, but you can sort of see people kind of and swap and kind of move in different. The one common thing that we do see is that breaching there's a breaching stage within each of those stages. They are going to want to talk about it. They are going to want to test the waters. And like I said, there's this subconscious line of thought that they want to see who's going to come to their aid. Right? They're going to want to see what they can get away with before they're crossing certain thresholds and what people are going to do in order and how they respond and they're going to behave accordingly. So that, I just wanted to impart that. In terms of shameless self-promotion, they can go to TVTP Solutions. That's an acronym for Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention. And there's a contact page right there on the website. I do consultations and I do speaking engagements. So just contact me and for whatever, I can do it in person, virtual. It doesn't matter what sector it is. So I have different things for different sectors, whether it's the education sector, law enforcement, mental and public health, or just general public awareness and things like that. So I just encourage you all to go there. There's also a media page. So I put some educational vignette things about my sort of mentality and my approach towards violence prevention up there that might be a little bit more in-depth things. And then obviously like all the interviews that I do, and this interview will be up there as well. And so yeah, please do get in contact with me and I'm happy to help in any way that I can.
Thank you so much, Robert, for being on the show. I really and truly appreciate you. Thank you for being here. And please, listeners, especially your communities, your different events that you're having, please consider Robert. He is a wealth of knowledge and he's talking about prevention, not that knee-jerk reaction, but he's actually helping these communities understand what they need to do from the ground up. And I love that approach of integrating prevention throughout our systems and processes. So till next time, have a wonderful day.